From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Sharry. What a show we have for you tonight. The quicksand underneath old Casanova Bowen. He is sinking in it as we speak. Now, as you know, this government, well, it could cut petrol taxes. But as you know, this government has no plan on doing something that they have increased since they came to office.
No.
There's no way.
No way.
No.
No. No. No. No. No.
No.
No.
No.
Because anyone using a petrol vehicle is, of course, evil, less than. You see, the key to the future of Australia and doing something about our 1% of climate emissions, forget China and its 30%, forget the third world with its 30%, forgive Russia with its 20%. No, Australia can change the weather if we all move to electric vehicles. Now, I get it. For those that live in the cities, for those that do short Ks, this might be the solution. One day into the future, yes, the cars that are very good when it comes to acceleration, and I get it as a rev head, but the reality is that they are not what Australians want to buy now. And even if they do buy them, they're so difficult to charge, and even if you do travel in long distances, there's so few places to charge them. At some point, the mousetrap may well end up being better, but right now, it is not. Now, Chris Bowen, of course, is doing everything he can to get everyone to change to electric vehicles by, on the very same day that they decided to increase petrol taxes, he was telling us that everyone's going to save money on electric vehicles or new fuel standards if they come into place. But the reality is that in Australia last year, 78% of all cars that were sold in Australia were utes and SUVs, the green and the orange. That's SUVs and the light commercial vehicles. These are the vehicles that people, of course, use because it's the right one for their family. They use because it's the right one for work, but it's not the right one for the Twitter set. So despite the fact that petrol taxes are increasing on Australians, the government will not cut those petrol taxes. They're trying to tell us that the new fuel efficiency standards, which are the same as America, I'll get to that in a second, where we are just as bad as Russia, that if these fuel efficiency standards are put into place, then rather than cars costing you more money, which they definitely will, you will, of course, save money. Their big number, by 2028, they say you'll save $1,000.
We know that by 2028 this will save average consumers on each vehicle each year over $1,000. But
then they just made up a new number. We were almost the only ones who told you about this. Thank goodness for the Australian keeping their eyes on it as well. The $1,000 promise that's just as impossible as the $275 promise on your power bills. Well, this was now suddenly going to go from $1,000 saving, magically, it was going to become $1,800, where, again, I read, the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, has ramped up his sales pitch for the proposed pollution caps on new vehicles, promising motorists living in outer suburban and regional areas could save up to $1,800 a year. Well, the promise of $1,000 that became $1,800, well, it got supercharged today. The Minister for the Republic, yes, his full-time job is to talk about whether or not we should or shouldn't become a republic, and given the results of the referendum of hell no last year, the chances of us getting to any vote anytime soon is pretty useless. Yet still, this is his full-time job. In between it, of course, he has to pop up on television and sprout the talking points of the day. But the $1,000 saving that became $1,800 savings is now $5,000. Have a listen to this. They're just making it up.
And we want to introduce some fuel efficiency standards that improve choice for Australian motorists and ultimately mean that they lower the cost of running their cars. It means that you won't have to put as much petrol in your car to run it every year. So on average, Australians will save about $5,000 a year by 2028.
Sorry? Where did this come from? $1,000 magically became $1,800 and now it's $5,000 is what they think you're going to save. Now, even if it was a slip of the tongue, it's a rather expensive one. And it proves that they are just making these numbers up. Now, remember, for the people to even maybe qualify for the $1,000, they have to buy the right type of new car at some time this year or next year. And then hopefully, if the sun's in the right place, if the wind's blowing in the right direction, if you hop on one leg, you might be able to stretch it out by $1,000. But of course, the cost of petrol will continue to increase because this government is obsessed with indexation. It means a couple of times a year they increase the amount of tax that comes on fuel. So simultaneously they're going to save you money while making money. You know it's not true. you know they're just making it up. And these numbers are just the same as I said, the $275 savings to power, which will never happen, the 500,000 jobs that were apparently going to appear in the green energy sector that will not happen. Best case scenario, it's 30,000. Yet these are just numbers that are the lipstick on the pig. Well, the Australians can see what the pig is, and they can see what the pig is often rolling in, and it ain't pleasant. It's, of course, what they like to feed when it comes to mushrooms. Keep you in the dark and, well, feed you the obvious. But we are well and truly awake to what is going on here. You know the BS that is being put in place here. The other one, of course, is that Chris Bowen says we have to do it because the Americans are doing it.
As we've said before, it is time for Australia to catch up with the rest of the world. These standards were introduced in the United States in 1975.
But the fuel standards, which, by the way, are not as stringent as the ones that he's planning to introduce here, have got a whole bunch of exemptions. Those massive yank tanks, which, if you like a ute, one day maybe you'd like to broom around in. I like that they still have a V8. But everything from the Rams, the Silverados, all of these things, guess what? Well, they are actually exempt. In fact, analysis of the publicly available data shows in 2021, 45% of the F-Series trucks, and I think we've got a picture of those pickup trucks, well, they are excluded from the fuel standard, as is Ram vehicles, where 33% of those vehicles are exempt. 15% of the Silverado utes are exempt. And in fact, the top three selling cars in the United States just last year, the F-Series, the Silverado and the Ram. So they want to tell you we've got to do it because America's doing it, but the actual cars are even bigger than the ones we have here, are exempt from that process. And guess what? The exemptions are going to get bigger. Because as we learn via that far right-wing news outlet, the Associated Press, the Biden administration, perhaps as soon as this week, is going to go backwards on the standards that are even more generous than the standards Bowen wants to introduce here. Now, one of the reasons is because the union workers who build good old-fashioned combustion engine cars, well, they don't want to lose their jobs in the transition to EV vehicles. They know that while it might be the future, it's not the future in 2024. And those union workers, well, they're important, not just for votes, but for muscle, for Biden as he tries to beat Trump in November. So he's going to ease off the accelerator because that's what the union mates want him to do. So Chris Bowen, he's going to start to look a little confused here because the numbers that he's serving up are garbage. $1,000 savings and now magically $5,000 savings. We have to do it because the Americans do it, but the Americans are not just going in reverse, but many of the vehicles that are exempt are even bigger than the ones that he wants to ban here. He is Casanova Bowen because everything he touches, ... You will have heard by now that, of course, Newspoll was not generous to the government. In fact, things are getting a little bit tighter. Any government that goes into an election at 51-49 and the two-party preferred, well, it's essentially up for grabs. And that was the finding in today's Newspoll, that in two-party preferred, it is 51-49 in favour of the Labor Party. Now, because of preferences, because of the Teals, they probably won't lose government, but they will be pushed into a minority. Now, I'll get into the details of just how big a minority he can afford to go into before he has to go shopping to the truly crazy people that are out there. But tonight, the Channel 9 newspapers and the Channel 9 television station put out their own poll, and it is terrible news for the Prime Minister. Now, of course, Albo thinks he is the solution. More Albo means more votes. Well, guess what? If you have a look at the Prime Minister's performance in recent weeks, 38% of people say that it's good or very good. That is down 17 points the same poll same time last year. The number of people who say poor or very poor is spiking. Not only is there a direct move from people who said good to now bad, but people are now starting to move from undecided to bad. That is a trend that this government has to deal with. But of course, they pretend they're Victorian Guard and the press. More advice from Murpharoo will make everything okay. Well, again, the far right-wing news source, that is the Channel 9 newspapers, here's some of the comments of the people who were speaking to those that were doing the poll. The vast majority of them were negative. Albo's promising everything to everyone, but there's not enough money to do it all. Just look at the cost of living and healthcare. What's going right? Albanese wasted too much time and money on The Voice. We could have done better things. Correct. $450 million, remember? They're not doing anything about the cost of living. Give the other guys a go. This is a government that's been around for 2 years. People now saying time to make a change because what we talk about every night, what 80% of Australians say is the number one issue, it's the reason to potentially change their vote. Labor aren't really delivering anything and becoming complacent. Yes, it's the arrogance of Each Way Albo and his ministers who think they're going to lie to you that the fuel efficiency standards will now save you $5,000. It's gone up by $4,000 a couple of months since they announced the policy. On the same day, they increased petrol taxes. The current government seems out of touch on immigration. Now, if the Prime Minister is, dare I say, scratching his head, trying to work out, why are these numbers going the way they are? I've done lots of amazing things. Here's the reality of Australia right now. Yes, they passed a law to deliver too little, too late tax cuts, and I'll get to those in a second, but they don't kick in till July. But all of the financial problems that were there for you last year are still there for you this year, and nothing is coming out of the government. Instead, I bang on about petrol because it is something a simple change could save people money today. But instead, I know we should have the complicated change because it might save somebody who's lucky enough to buy the right type of new car $5,000. Garbage, rubbish, bulltish. Here's the reality of why polls are turning on Albo. Because he has not and will not deliver reality for people who are having problems with cost of living. The consumer website Finder puts out an interesting survey, and this is a survey of more than double the number of people that will answer questions like Newspoll or Morgan. It's about 3,000 people. Well, as I told you last week, 9 million people in this country have less than $1,000 in the bank. That's why the Prime Minister can say, I'm doing everything about cost of living. He can hold Toto as hard as he likes. He can think that we're going to have a wedding tent recovery. The reality for Australians are that 1 in 5 Australians, 20%, say they got nothing in the bank. Nothing. That's 4.2 million Australians. 9.4 million have less than $1,000 in the bank, but even then, they've only got $210 in the bank, which isn't enough to even replace a flat tyre. Finder again concludes that 3 out of 4 people, 76% of Australians, are stressed about their current financial situation. So the Prime Minister can tell us, as he told his MPs, that they have a quote-unquote solution to cost of living, which is a too little, too late tax cut that doesn't arrive for months. Remember, the best case scenario is not the thousands of dollars per year, it's what you get back per week. And if you're earning $45,000 or less, it'll be $15 a week. Oh, I could wrap myself in giggles at $22 a week, $32 or $41, $120 a month. And that's for people over $100,000. You know, the evil buggers who, of course, should pay their fair share of half in tax. If you want to know why the Prime Minister's ratings are where they are right now, I'll tell you. According to, again, Finder, millions of people are looking for a second job. And that's on top of the almost 1 million people who already have a second job to make ends meet. According to the Bureau of Statistics, again, that far right-wing think tank, 970,700 people currently have more than one job. Before Albo was the Prime Minister, it was 860,000 people. So up by 100,000 in 2 years. 5 years ago, it was 760,000 people. Up, up, up. All of this, of course, was a reason to change the last government. Well, I tell you what, it's a reason not to reappoint this government. And people will register a protest at the upcoming election, be that if a couple of interest rates go their way towards the end of this year or definitely next year. Again, Finder says when 1 gig isn't good enough, they say 6.7 million people are searching around on the internet right now. Because, again, they did a survey, this time 1,000 people. 32% of Australians, that's 6.7 million people, feel financially pressured enough to have to look for a second job. Prime Minister, that's why your poll numbers are tanking. Because while you may have been able to squeeze one out when it comes to Dunkley, the reality is that the bonfire of inaction on cost of living that saw you last year take $1,500 away from 10 million workers with no promise of it coming back, and the best case scenario is $120 a month, or for the people who need it the most, $15 a week. It's a political solution, not an actual solution to people's problems with cost of living. That means no one has money in the bank and millions of people are now looking for a second job on top of the full-time work they are currently doing because they can't make ends meet. Yet your government is going to make it more expensive to buy a car. Your government is going to increase petrol taxes, and your government is obsessed with an energy transition that costs $1 trillion and means our power bills are going up, up, up. And even if they're ever so slightly down in the next market offer, in South East Queensland they're still going up. In regional Australia they're still going up. In the capital city of Sydney they're going down by 1%. Let alone the number of people who are trying to pay off a house right now. Now, people have now got used to the idea that the choke that is the interest rates, and I know you're trying to rig the Reserve Bank to get your union mates to get onto the Reserve Bank to eventually start cutting interest rates so they can do it close to the 1st of July, so you can have an election sooner rather than later, and we know you're planning one sooner rather than later because, of course, they're going to change the funding rules. They're going to give Pocock and others extra Senate seats in the territories. The reality for Australians, compared to when this bloke was not the Prime Minister, after a dozen Albo and Chalmers-led interest rate rises, if you are paying off a home loan of $500,000, you've had to find $14,500. From where, I don't know. The same people that are looking for jobs, that have no money in the bank, are trying to search for an extra $21,000 a year since this bloke took over. Now, it's all well and good if you're a federal politician. You got the highest pay rise in 10 years. If you're paying off, like many people in Sydney, Melbourne and central Brisbane are trying to pay off more than $1 million, they've had to find $30,000. Now, I know that the left wing think that anyone with a $1 million mortgage is just Scrooge McDuck. They've just got a vault out the back and they swim in the dollar coins. Rubbish. It doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum, the tension in the economy is obvious. We have been in a per capita, i.e. family recession, for months. The Prime Minister can only sell his BS so much before Australians will actually look at their own circumstances. I repeat, find your power bill from May of 2022. If by the next election it's $275 cheaper, vote Labor. But I guarantee it won't be, so don't. Don't reward their BS and their lies. Their lies where they tell you that you could save $1,000, $1,800, $5,000 when it comes to the fuel efficiency standards. And we've got to do them because America's doing them, but America's not even doing the ones we're trying to do, and they're going to roll back the ones that currently exist. So there's no mystery about where Newspoll is today. And there will be all the tricks in the world, and we'll have a scare campaign about nuclear, and we'll have the dirt unit of the Prime Minister telling us that Peter Dutton's going to eat babies and force children to only eat one meal every 3 days, whatever garbage they're going to make up. But we're seeing today a move, and a move since the last election. And it is that the Labor Party's vote is down. The Labor Party's vote at the last election was one of the worst it's had in a century. They were only able to form government because of Greens' preferences. According to Newspoll today, their primary vote's at 32%. That's down from the last election. The Liberal Party's is up since the last election. The Greens is up since the last election. The other, Independents, UAP, that's up as well. But have a look at little old One Nation. The party that nobody talks about, the party that nobody will interview, well, their national figure right now is 2% higher than it was at the last election. Now, of course, a preference deal with One Nation will be terrible and evil. What about a preference deal with the Greens? The people who openly pose with photos of where the Jews should go, which is a bin. No scandal about that. Instead, the scandal will be about the evils of One Nation. Now, if there was an election that was held anytime soon, the government would go from its very slim majority, and while the Labor Party means that if you ever cross the floor or speak against them, well, they'll give you life, so basically as soon as you've got a majority, well, it doesn't matter, you can pretend you've got 90 seats, but the reality is, unlike Abbott, unlike Rudd, they don't have it. Unlike Howard, there's no backbench to burn, but there is going to be a burning of the backbench. They'll go from their current number, they'll lose 4, and there'll be a minority by 3. The coalition, because of the Teals, will get nowhere near government, but they'll go up to 62. The Greens will hold 4 and everything else stays the same, including the 10 independents. But can I give you a little roadmap here? If it was 73 seats, the government, of course, will be returned. And I tell you who will prop them up. Helen Haines. Helen Haines, left-wing independent in the seat of Indi. She'll back the government, no questions asked. Andrew Wilkie, well, he'll do it before the election's even called. Rebecca Sharkey, she'll end up going with the party with the most seats. She said that in the past. So there you go. You've got your 3 people that hold them up together. Add to that, maybe Bob Catter. Apparently him and Albo are mates. But if it's any lower than 73, they're going to start to get themselves into trouble. They're going to have to go shopping to a couple of the left-wing Teals out of Melbourne. If it's any lower than 70 seats, and that is the upper end of things, but that's when the Greens start to come into play. But that's a mess. Which brings us to Tasmania. I feel for you, Tassie, I really do. Good people, but I tell you what, the election results have produced an absolute farce of a parliament. The Premier, of course, is on the phone today. He is the one in the box seat. He's the one with the most seats, and the expectations are that they will be able to get a couple more that get them to only need a couple of people that aren't card-carrying members of the Liberal Party to return fully as a government. Latest count. We're going to talk about this for the next couple of days. You need 18 seats to form a government. Liberals currently have 13. They could win 3 more. Best case scenario, 16 seats. Most likely 15 is where they'll end up, needing 3 votes to get them over the line. The Labor Party nowhere near it, but they may get another 2. The Greens, stable at 4. Lambie has 2, could end up with 1 more. Best case scenario, 2 more, but most likely 1 more. The Independents stay 2. So, if you end up 15 plus 2 of the independents, well, you still need the Lambie network. So Lambie is going to make the decision here. The same lady who had candidates in the market, who they openly admitted had no policies, who before the election said they had no idea which party they were going to back, the one who on election night was saying she didn't like the Liberals because they campaigned against her, because apparently she's the only one allowed to play a bit of politics here. But the reality is that things are starting to soften, and yes, at this stage, Lambie's people look like they're going to have to back in the only party that's going to be able to form government. There's an outside chance that Labor will find a way, but they'll have a new leader. Reports this evening via the Mercury is that the 3-time loser, who's been their leader, well, she's going to get the shove, and whether that ends up being the change that's needed for a hodgepodge of everyone but the Liberals to form a government, we'll all learn together. But as for Jackie Lambie, and Jackie Lambie's Crazy Cat Lady Act, it is very successful, and because of the small number of people that she needs in the north and the northwest, she will be able to continue remaining a feature of Australian politics. But a person who carries on like this is not the type of person that you want in charge of, who is going to be running a government, which of course has to deliver services. Unlike federal politics, where they can have sort of these big lofty conversations, this is nuts and bolts. State politics, local council is nuts and bolts. And speaking of, here is the Senator today telling us what her latest demand will be.
What we'd like to see is some transparency coming out of the Parliament in the state of Tasmania. Is the Liberal Labor Party, if we've got to form government with them, does that mean that they're going to be transparent? It comes down to trust. Trust is the magic word here. What I want to see first and foremost is them putting Tasmania first.
What does it even mean? Honestly, what does it mean? I mean, obviously the Premier of Tasmania is going to put Tasmania first. The Premier of South Australia, the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory. What's the example of them not putting Tasmania? What does that mean? Now, we know that she doesn't like the stadium, but of course you can't have the team unless you have the stadium. That's a deal that's been done by the AFL. Now, you can think what you like, but people have had their say. If this was apparently the great electoral poison, it'd be Labor looking to minority government, not the Libs. But seriously, this was a person who was telling us yesterday that the people that she expects to be elected may not even pick one because they need to be on training for the next 3 years. Now, I get it. The Catherine Wheel's great on breakfast television and everyone loves it because Jackie's in your corner. But I guarantee you, I'll make this prediction. Between now and when eventually a government is formed, she will at one point say, unless the Premier goes, then I'm not going to back him in because he was mean to me at the election. Well, how do you think you won seats? Because you were mean to people in the election. That's what happens. It's contested. For his part, the Premier is trying to be as polite as possible. But we'll see where this goes. Now, another one. Victoria. Old mate Daniel Andrews, the final chapter written about the reality of his premiership. Incredibly successful electorally, you can't argue. Multiple election wins. But one of the people who has constantly been ringing the bell about what really happens behind the scenes when this bloke was in charge, and now that his mini-me's in charge, it's going to be exactly the same, was the former boss of the Corruption Commission there, a bloke called Robert Redlich. Now, Robert Redlich talked around about a thing called grey corruption. This is when, essentially, everyone who works for the public service only doesn't want to upset the minister, so you give the minister whatever they want, no matter how stupid it is. And then there's another one who said goodbye today, and that's Deborah Glass. She's done at the end of the week. She's the Ombudsman. Now, I don't know this lady, never spoke to her in my life, but she is the exact example of the type of person that you need calling balls and strikes and actually being an umpire on how crook your government is. You see, she went them on the red shirts. She's gone them on the waste of things like the Commonwealth Games. And today she talked about a legacy of fear. Now, all of this was able to be achieved because on day one, this bloke sacked the head of the public service, and it sent a message to every single person in the public service: do what Dan says or Dan's going to do you over. And just as it is in Queensland, when one side of politics has been there for the best part of 30 years, minus a 3-year little blip a long time ago, everyone knows the whole thing's stitched up. You either work overtly for the party in the minister's office, or you work kind of for the party and you don't disrupt when it comes to the public service. Again, a culture that the Ombudsman does not believe is going to change under the mini-me who is now the Premier of Victoria. She gave a report today, about 50 pages in length, and it shows what she has learnt over 10 years of a culture of fear. When the government runs roughshod over everyone, can do no wrong, shuts everyone up, and even when they're caught doing the wrong thing, pretends they haven't read the letter, like Andrews did about the former IBAC boss. She said this today.
She says it hit her when the head of the public service was ousted for giving frank and fearless advice on the first day Daniel Andrews became Premier.
That was a legacy of fear, yes. I mean, that, you know, the impact of that was felt by 50,000 public servants.
Here's the point. Victoria has changed forever for the worse. It is up to the media to absolutely focus on what the umpire says about what the government does wrong. It is up to the Parliament, and they do not have control in the upper house, to actually change the laws that make sure that when the umpire says something, it has to be listened to. But surprise, surprise, the current Premier, who is there because she's going to continue the great work of Daniel Andrews, well, she says, nothing to see here.
I would take respectfully a different view to the Ombudsman. Every government that I've been involved in over a number of years, policy matters are carefully thought through.
What a weekend it's been in the United States. Now, as we were making our way towards the weekend, some Republicans got together with Democrats. They decided to pass a budget that will only get them until September, which means another almighty bin fire in the lead up to the election. But of course, the United States is more than, $30-something trillion in debt. This budget will add another $2 trillion to that debt, and Republicans who chose not to vote to continue to push their country into debt are red hot.
And the American people and American families are the ones left holding the bag. This is business as usual in the swamp. And here's the deal to my Republican colleagues. You will own every single bit of this. If you vote for this bill, you own it.
But of course, the big news is that in the next couple of hours, Donald Trump has to come up with the best part of $700 million. Now, despite the fact that he is appealing the decision of a ridiculous New York court that turned around and said that he fraudulently overvalued his properties to get loans that he paid back and the banks had no problems with, but this was just the way to get Trump, the smoking gun, Al Capone style, get him on the taxes, get him on the valuation, rather than all of the other stuff that they think they can get him. But of course, today is the day he has to come up with the money, even though he is turning around and trying to appeal. How ridiculous that you still have to pay the penalty, regardless of the fact of whether or not, of course, the Supreme Court might turn around and say that it's cruel and unusual punishment. I think all of us would say $700 million fine for a loan you paid back that the banks don't have a problem with might be the result. But of course, if he can't pay, the expectation is, and as soon as, by the time you wake up tomorrow, the New York Attorney General, who only ran on one policy and one policy only, which was get Trump, was going to start selling his assets, something that even the bloke from Shark Tank knows is dodgy as heck.
I swear to you, everybody, this is not America. Don't worry, adults will enter the room soon. It's like a dress-up party in court. It was a crazy night out with the parents. Poo-poo happened, but someone will come in and fix this. This is not America. I swear to you, this is not America. And every American should be saying what I'm saying. This is just New York for now. Now, would I put money into New York? Never, until this crazy madness ends. And I'm not the only person saying that. But this is not America.
Mr. Wonderful, well done. All right, plenty of news for you to find out when you wake up tomorrow morning, and lots of debate now, including with the Deputy Lord Mayor of Melbourne, who was a Superman, who did a citizen's arrest over the weekend. Not all superheroes wear capes. The story that is the biggest of the weekend, Nicholas Reese taking on a lunatic on the tram, and to clap him on, our dear friend Matt Canavan. Get ready, we're into it tonight. I've been looking forward to this. I've been so looking forward to this. None other than the wonderful Matt Canavan, Senator, of course, doing his business in Canberra. Back to Queensland soon, mate. Relax, you'll be okay. And I tell you what, it was a dark and stormy night. It was a dark and stormy night. The sea was angry, my friend. The fish was this big. Nicholas Reese, the Deputy Lord Mayor, you came face to face with evil. There was a nutter on a tram, and you got up there and you took him down. You got a couple into his ribs. According to the news reports, you buggered up your thumb. Tell us the story of the vigilante who was able to keep Melbourne safe. What happened, pal?
Well, you don't have the red jacket on tonight, Paul, but you got the green jacket on, but you're just as fired up. Yeah, look, it was one of those moments in life, I guess. I prefer the term Good Samaritan rather than vigilante.
I say hero.
But
I say
look,
hero. Come on, what happened? What was the look in his eyes? Did he have the look of madness, of evil? Were you like Superman versus Lex Luthor? Could you see the Joker grin and the Bruce Wayne of it all? You didn't need a cape. What happened?
Well, look, he was a young bloke. He said he was from Brazil. He was drunk as a skunk, high as a kite, and he did have that crazy look in his eyes. When you see someone in the eyes, you think this is a loose unit who's out of control. And so, yeah, we were on a tram on our way to a concert at the Rod Laver Arena. Melbourne Storm was also playing at Amy Park, so the tram was completely packed, and this guy was sort of lurching all over the sort of teeny boppers on the way to the concert. He was sort of trying to, I don't know, pick a fight with some of the guys off to the rugby game, and I thought either way this is going to end up very, very badly for this guy. So started to talk to him, tried to walk him back off the ledge. He sort of got a bit out of hand. It was a bit of a scuffle. I did indeed bust my thumb, but it's fair to say we escorted him from the tram, and Melbourne was the better for it, and the people on the tram were the better for it.
Nicholas Reese, how did I know that you, my friend, are a hero amongst us? From now on for the rest of the show, this is not Batman. This is Nicholas Reese taking on those mad Brazilians. Senator, could you please get some sort of emotion?
You would have done the same thing yourself, as I know Matt would have as well. You know, you got to step up sometimes, and that's what we did.
Opportunities. Things aren't as exciting up in Yeppoon usually. We just need a few more Extinction Rebellion protests, and maybe I'll be able to reach the heights of Nicholas there.
We have plenty of them, a lot of them here in Melbourne.
Okay? I notice your thumb's okay there. You're all right. Were you still able to text? You still got the talking points for tonight?
Look, can I sound like a bit of a wimp and say, yeah, my thumb is actually still aching a bit from the fall, and you know, the heart was pumping, but we got the job done.
I've always wanted to play that bongo thing, and we found a way finally. Anyway, well done, Batman. All right, so let's talk about Matt. What about the government, okay? Oh, if you buy the right car, by 2028, you'll save $1,000. Then it was $1,800, and today Matt Thistlethwaite, roll the tape, says now it's $5,000 you're going to save. Roll this BS, almost.
And we want to introduce some fuel efficiency standards that improve choice for Australian motorists and ultimately mean that they lower the cost of running their cars. It means that you won't have to put as much petrol in your car to run it every year. So on average, Australians will save about $5,000 a year by 2028.
They're just making it up, Matt. $5 grand now.
Well, they're also making up the English language because this is not a choice they're putting to you. They're trying to force you to buy the cars that they like. They want you to buy an EV, and there's nothing stopping people buying an EV now. If you wanted to go down that route, and if their numbers are right, potentially save yourself money, go for your life. You can do that right now. What they're trying to do here is make petrol cars more expensive, explicitly in their model. Petrol cars become more expensive, and EVs become less expensive because the people who buy petrol cars cross-subsidise those who buy EVs. EVs already get a lot of subsidies, and they're about to get a lot more if the government gets its way. And I don't think the government should be trying to tell you which car you want to buy, because on the government's own figures that I've been through, they don't actually account for the higher depreciation costs. Well, there's also this too. This is a comparison to the US, I think you're going to put up there, that the US has watered down its emission reductions over the past week. And now that leaves the government in a quite embarrassing position where their reductions will be 3 times the size of what the Biden administration is suggesting. And they've used the US as an example the whole way through. So I think they have no choice here but to back down embarrassingly following the Biden administration. That seems to be what they're briefing the papers right now.
And I mean, isn't that the issue here, Nicholas, where the briefing was, we've got to do it because America's doing it. Biden's going to walk back because he wants those auto workers, and then the standards we're going to have is going to be even more arduous than the United States because some of the cars that are already excluded are way bigger than anything we'd be buying here. But what about Thistlethwaite? I mean, just $5,000. How does a policy go from what you announce to literally 5 times what you think the winnings will be in a couple of months?
Well, I mean, look, part of the legislative process, part of the reform game that this government is engaged in, making Australia better, is that you take on board sensible feedback and you make changes which are necessary. And as the world changes around you, you need to make changes. And that looks like what this government is doing. I mean, if the US is shifting and the rest of the world is shifting, then probably Australia needs to have an eye on that. I mean, I do want to take issue with some of the comments Matt made there. I mean, this policy is actually about giving Australians choice of more vehicles that cost less to drive, because at the moment Australia is missing out on the range of electric vehicles that are available in other markets because we don't have the same regulatory environment which is encouraging automakers to send electric vehicles to this country. And so by moving in step with the rest of the world, we won't get the old, gas-guzzling clunkers set here. We'll get the new models and those new EVs. And that's a good thing for Australian consumers because EVs, as Matt will readily concede, cost less to drive over the life of the vehicle.
No, this is the other problem, Nick. This is the other problem. The government's figures, I was about to get to this before, the government's figures don't factor in depreciation. And so one of the big costs of owning an electric vehicle, it's becoming apparent, is they lose their value quicker than a petrol car because the batteries degrade quite fast and they are a big cost of the total cost of the car. Now, as I say, you want to buy an EV, that's fine. I'm not stopping anyone. I don't want to stop anybody from exercising free choice in a free country. But the government's figures are totally wrong and distorted because they don't factor that in. They also don't factor in the carbon emissions that are made when making an electric car. They only factor in the emissions that occur at what they call the tailpipe. And so it's a completely distorted model. It's not giving Australians choice, and it is a new tax. It will cost those people who want to buy and continue to buy a petrol car, it'll cost you more. And I don't think we should be dividing Australian car owners into good people and bad people. I don't think we should be making those among us who have to buy a petrol car for their work or their trade or their large-sized families into thinking they're any way evil or lesser than other Australians who want to buy an EV. Who cares which car you want to buy? It doesn't need to be a political choice.
Did you notice that Nicholas didn't say anything about the $5,000 bit? We just walked past that. The $5,000 bit just didn't happen. Not there to be seen. All right,
I was hoping he'd treat it the same way as that Brazilian on the tram. He'd grab it and throw it to the ground, kick it out.
Up your other thumb.
No, he just walked straight past it.
The Minister for the Republic. Geez, imagine that you walk in the office. Hey, guys, just checking, are we a republic yet? Nah, all right. I'll be back tomorrow. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. This is the full-time job. Fair dinkum. All right. Now, let's have a look at the opinion polls that are around today because they tell quite a few stories, all right? Firstly, Prime Minister's personals are now in the wrong place. Now, obviously, he thinks he's worst-case scenario 12 months out from a job, but literally more people saying he's doing a poor job than a good job right now. obviously, also, as Stephen Conroy correctly pointed out on the Bolt Report a bit earlier this evening, we don't have a national result. There's elections in Queensland where it's particularly good for the LNP at the moment. In South Australia, the Greens might be able to steal a seat off the Libs. Victoria's obviously going to be different. There's lots of different things within things here, but let's get back to my central point here, which is I think that the rubber hits the road, that yes, the government has a policy, they changed the law, but nothing kicks in until July the 1st, and everyone's financial circumstances are exactly the same as last year, if not a little more because of how long the tail goes. So, Matt, I think it's all well and good to win over the press gallery, but when, I show you every night the data, right? People, a couple of million people with less than $200 in the bank, about 1 million people working more than one job. Surprise, surprise, it ain't as easy as they're making out that everything is, because sure, thanks to the good people that mine the country, the budget looks all right, but the family budget is screwed.
Well, look, there's no doubt these polls reflect the pressures that Australian families are under. And I could use this segment as opportunity just to kick Anthony Albanese, but I don't want to kick someone when they're down. I'd prefer to give a call to action to my own side, because there's no doubt that we're within striking distance here, that the next election is up for grabs, and the Australian people are looking for people to provide solutions to the issues that face them. And I just think if we're serious about winning the next election, we've got to now show the courage of our convictions. We have to take a bold and courageous policy platform to the next election. We've started that with things like nuclear, but I think there's a lot more work to do here to show that we're ready for government, to show that we've got another plan for the Australian people. And if we have that courage, I think we've got a serious chance of pulling off something that's never been done in Australian history. A first-term government has never lost since the Great Depression. That was the last time, so a long, long time ago. And Tony Abbott nearly did it, didn't quite get there. So I think Peter's in a very unique position here, but there's a lot of work for us to do yet.
Yeah, look, again, looking at what we did today with the news poll, it'd be 73 seats. I've already said the 3 independents that I think they would get there with. So the conversation at this stage is going to be about minority. We'll see what happens when it comes to the Teals. I know there are people being pre-selected against them, and we'll see how all of that plays out. But, the Guardian, Twitter and the ABC hasn't started their whole carry-on of trying to cement them in, because once they get re-elected, they'll be there for a generation. But what do you think of the polls here, Nicholas, where, again, if you're a Labor man, you're trying to work out, okay, there was that opinion poll that came out, I think it was in The Essential a couple of months ago, that said half the country doesn't even know there's a tax cut coming. We're about to have $40 million worth of ads telling us a tax cut's coming. But when you're having to find $30,000, like many people in Melbourne are, to pay off their house because of interest rate rises, good luck with $120 a month.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no doubt that cost of living is the biggest issue going around. It's issue number 1, number 2, number 3. And then the sort of issues that are number 4 and 5 are sort of variations on cost of living, whether that's energy, housing or something similar. And so, look, I think the government needs to keep a really close eye on that issue. I do think that the tax cuts or the changes they made to the tax cuts did help them in the Dunkley by-election, which, goes against, remember, a lot of the commentary coming out of Canberra at the time was that the Albanese cuts had undermined Australians' trust in Albanese. Well, I think these latest news poll figures actually show that Albanese's personal numbers are holding up pretty well. So I do think there is recognition there that the Labor government is making an effort to try and help with cost of living, but I absolutely think they need to do more. I mean, some of the really interesting things that jumped out at me in these numbers was that really high third-party vote. So the non-major parties vote is now running at almost a third of the vote. And that actually makes the electoral outcome very volatile, because when the vote's going 3 ways, it means different seats can break in very unexpected directions. It makes the overall result very hard to predict. And it's also fair to say that at times in Australian history where that third-party vote is very high, it actually leads to very unstable and unpredictable periods for the parliament as well, and how the parliament operates. So keep an eye on that number. Final thing I'll make an observation about is preferred leader. So Albanese is miles ahead of Peter Dutton on that measure, 48 to 34. Now, I know, Paul, when you clung to preferred leader for 3 years of Morrison's leadership, 100%. When he was tanking on the 2PP, 100%. And you kept saying, but what about that preferred leader? And I said, hey, that's not the be-all and end-all. Well, I'm now going to actually qualify my position on that and say, hey, the lead that Albanese has over Dutton is so huge
12 months before the election, Albo was running third to don't know.
Not
so
that
yes,
unusual.
yes,
Yeah.
it ended up being quite the move in the end, but I'm glad it's you clinging, not me. All right, well, we'll get back with... Is it Batman or Captain?
Well, you did cling to it for 3 years. Let's not forget that, Paul.
Did I hide? Did I hide? No, I've been honest about it all. Anyway, quick break, back with more. Plenty more to talk about, including the mess in Tasmania, and I may surprise you with an issue where Nicholas and I might be in furious agreement, and Matt's going to have to talk me out of it. More in a sec. All right, here with Matt Canavan, here with Nicholas Reese. Now, there is a push on for another increase to the minimum wage, and I think this one's reasonable. I think one of the mistakes that was made during the last election was when people argued against it. It meant the Prime Minister could stand up and do that dollar coin business. The reality is that, yes, an increase in minimum wage is particularly difficult for small business, but at a time when we've talked as relentlessly as we have about cost of living, people earning, $26, $28 an hour, I think you're not going to be able to break the bank with that. Business has come out and said that they don't like the idea. Nicholas, I'll assume that you support what I'm saying here, but is there an opportunity, Matt, for the coalition to say, you know what, this one, it's small enough, let's back it in?
Look, I'm going to disappoint you too, Paul. I support an increase.
Good boy.
Sorry.
No, let it go. You're with us.
Yeah. I think it's reasonable to have an increase. I suppose the issue business is saying is that the increase last year was based on inflation, that inflation numbers that didn't turn out to be so hot, so that should be factored in. But look, it's not workers that have caused inflation. We shouldn't blame them. People need to have their wages go up with what costs are, and they should be factored in. The reason we've got too much inflation is because this place here in Canberra spent too much money during COVID and the RBA has printed too much money. That's what's happened. So obviously we're running that in with the higher interest rates that are there now, and that's taking the time. But workers shouldn't have to suffer because of the mistakes made by the government and by the RBA.
100%. Nick, I assure you agree?
Yeah, look, I actually do think ACCI has a fair point. That's Australian Chamber of Commerce around the inflation analysis last year, but this year I think their call for 2% pay rise when inflation's running at 3.7 is challenging. I mean, let's not forget, like, the basic wage is $23.23 an hour. Like, you try living on that in this day and age, and so we don't want to see people on the lowest wages going any further backwards in this country. So, yeah, I'd be hoping it's considerably higher than 2%. And look, there's got to be an inflation component and there's got to be a productivity component.
Well, correct.
Yeah,
right, Matt, you got 30.
That's what I'd add. The problem is the productivity is declining. So
yes,
that's going to make it challenging for businesses to fund these wage rises. We've got to get productivity up. It's the only way to get real wages up over long term.
Yeah, Matt, seriously, 30 seconds on this and Trump. $700 million he's got to pay by this time tomorrow.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. The US judicial system is broken, and this is absurd. It's only helping Trump. I mean, maybe he'll let them steal his assets if he's of a mind to, because that will just let his poll numbers go up even more. Although I'm sure he'd be a little bit reticent to see those assets he's built over many years go.
Yeah, I would think so. All right, well, plenty in all of this. We'll see it all tomorrow. Thank you very much, Nicholas. Thank you very much, Senator. We'll talk to you all again very soon. And apparently I shouldn't give up my day job when it comes to the drumming, but I thought it was okay. I thought it was all right. Anyway, from the superhero that is Nicholas Reese, well done, mate. And, hope your thumb gets better. Quick break. Back with more. The late debate about 4 minutes from now here on Paul Murray Live. Now, I've got an excellent business idea. You know how there's like Cameo where you can ring celebrities and they'll tell you happy birthday? What about if Liz Storer could just deliver a character assessment? I think it's a brilliant idea and I'd be the first in line. Love you, darling. And here she is with the fellas and the late debate.